Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, and I am here to help you sleep better with true horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like my video. I would love to know where you are from and what time you're watching this video. So please leave a comment to let me know, and I will draw from that experience to tell even better stories. When you are ready, feel free to relax. My name is Edward, and I spent the majority of my life in a quaint farming village nestled in the Scottish Highlands. When I say small, I truly mean it. I can recount every detail that was present, except for two large farms with substantial, ancient homes that belonged to the two eldest farmers in the region, alongside 6 additional houses, a farm store, and a quaint little establishment. On the outskirts of the village, there stood a coffee shop and nothing else. Nearby, a bus stop marked my little corner of the world. Gateway to existence for the initial 17 years of my life, this reality was also. It was the same for all the children in that village and the neighboring ones. All my friends experienced life in a similar way. Here I am, with little to occupy my time at home and a bus service known for its unpredictability to rely on. Liberation from our small communities. When I hit my mid-teens and finally got my own car, it transformed into my most cherished item, as it represented my gateway to independence. Owning my own car meant the world to me. Yearning for something more in life, I could finally escape to anywhere, so occasionally I would venture away from my mundane little town for several days at a time. For years, I toiled diligently, putting aside every sin I could muster, all in pursuit of a little cash for gas. When I reached my limit, I decided to put everything into this charming little 3-door hatchback I'd spotted at a used car lot. I recall my friends were nearly as thrilled as I was. The car was practically new, and after all, they shared in the excitement too. They were set to relish the advantages of my recent purchase, and far sooner than anticipated. As on the very first day, after it was delivered to me, we all drove to a nest for the day, stopping by Domino's. Attempted to order drinks at a local pub, but all we received was the security guard's laughter directed at us. Varese wasn't a large city or anything of the sort, and this was merely a short round trip lasting a few hours. It was incredibly rewarding. Upon returning to our hometown, we immediately began plotting our next escapade, but we sought a destination that would present a bit more of a challenge. A place neither of us had ventured to before, venturing as far from home as my car would allow. I found myself pondering for an extended period. We concluded that London was the ideal destination, a city neither of us had explored before, even though by that time we had already visited Edinburgh. The heart of our existence, London appeared to be the epicenter of everything, and we were fully prepared to take on the challenge. We geared up for an epic adventure with the boys and were buzzing to kick off our adventure. Yet none of us could have foreseen the chilling tale that lay ahead on our journey. We believed we had it all. We have a strategy for the upcoming months. We'll save every penny and then set off in the summer to fully embrace the long days ahead, despite the pleasant weather. The reality is that the planning phase consumed a considerable amount of our time. Preparing for such a grand adventure made us feel as if we were about to embark on our own epic journey, reminiscent of a legendary tale. As we prepared to leave, we gathered all our belongings, climbed into the car, and set off on our journey. We could barely hold back our enthusiasm. We believed it would be an unforgettable journey, an unforgettable occasion that would signify our shift from youth to maturity. And the reality is we weren't even close to that. Incorrect, as that is precisely what it was. Nonetheless, we would never do. It was a journey to London, and undoubtedly, none of us would return unchanged after this experience. The journey was organized in 2 segments, a 5-hour drive to Blackpool, where we would spend the night in A. We booked a hotel, and the following day, we would complete the remaining 5-hour journey to London. We opted for a travel lodge located on the outskirts of the city, journey to find some accommodations, and the drive was quite straightforward. However, upon our arrival, we discovered that we had made an unfortunate oversight, as we believed we could simply arrive and book the rooms without paying in advance. We inquired about the rooms, but unfortunately, they were fully booked, leaving us no option but to continue driving in search of a place to stay, somewhere with a free room or two. But to our utter dismay, everything was fully booked for the night, and ultimately we had to come to terms with the fact that continuing our drive was a gamble, especially since I was utterly drained. Ultimately, we reached the conclusion that the ideal solution was to locate a parking spot and settle in for the night in the car. Eventually, we secured a cozy little parking space at the gas station turned down the seats, and they decided to rest for a few hours before continuing their journey. Title for London. I can't recall the duration of my slumber, but I distinctly remember waking up. One of my friends kept tapping me on the shoulder, insisting that I needed to go to the bathroom since the vehicle was positioned about 3 doors away. I had to exit the car and adjust the seat forward to allow lice to escape. At that moment, I remained caught in that delicate space between dreams and reality, yet the mere existence of his presence there, being disturbed during my downtime, really soured my mood. But I eventually stepped out of the car. That fooler could sneak off to relieve himself behind some bushes nestled in a small wood nearby, and the noise we created stirred everyone awake. My other 2 friends, who were also quite displeased about their inability to sleep, so I perched on the edge of From my vantage point, I observed Lester step into the shadowy recesses of the parking lot. I recall the sensation of rubbing my eyes, telling myself that it would all pay off when we were finally pursuing our own path. In London, yet at that instant, I perceived the bushes stirring, and as I turned my gaze towards them, in that moment, I noticed Lister sprinting towards the car with all his might, and before I had a chance to utter a word, he, with a very pale face, began urging me to start the car, start the car, start the car. Quick, start the car, he shouted, shoving me aside. He could slide into the back seat once more, prompting everyone else to question what his issue was, yet he simply overlooked them and focused on conveying that we needed to leave right away. It dawned on me that whatever had instilled such fear in him was clearly lurking in the bushes of the woods at that moment. I turned my gaze to that area, and it was then that I noticed the outline of a figure materializing from the trees. It was evident from his appearance that a man was approaching us directly. However, this was not an ordinary stroll, as if someone were about to share something pleasant. This man was approaching with intent, swiftly advancing with a commanding presence that felt quite daunting. I was left utterly bewildered. Had transpired during his brief interaction with Lur, but the outlook seemed grim, particularly upon realizing his. My friend in the back seat began to panic, urgently insisting that we needed to get out of there. Right away, I realized this may come off as a bit self-centered, but the initial thought that crossed my mind was that I would cause harm. The moment I grasped the key, a surge of wild determination coursed through me, compelling me to turn it in the ignition. As soon as I did, I pressed down on the gas and zoomed out of the parking lot onto the main road. Once we felt secure, we all began to shout at Lister, demanding an explanation of how on earth he managed to provoke someone to such fury in the desolate night. In under 10 minutes, I need to share that Lister was the group's joker. At times, his antics would ruffle feathers, and despite his best intentions, he often found himself embroiled in trouble, dragging us along for the ride. That's why our initial thought was that he was just being his usual annoying self, making those silly little jokes. In poor judgment, he caused us to be removed from our sleeping arrangements. But when we began to confront him about it, my friend nearly lost his mind over the accusation, vehemently denying any rudeness and demanding silence from everyone around him. Clarify the true events, but when he revealed what truly occurred, it was something so unsettling that it felt like a scene straight from a horror film. And for a brief moment, we considered the possibility that he was merely joking. But deep down, we understood he was serious. We knew him too well, sufficient to recognize he wasn't being dishonest. And the fear was evident on his face. What law? They told us, and I promise you, what I'm saying is completely true. It seems I may have just seen a murder. It was around 3 in the morning. and we found ourselves on a desolate stretch of highway, somewhere between Manchester and Liverpool. We were all captivated as my friend began to recount the events that unfolded. The bushes he recounted that he ventured a bit deeper into the foliage for some solitude, and just as he was about to take, as Bobby stepped out, he caught a sound not far off. He hesitated to relieve himself, wanting to ensure he was truly alone first. He ventured deeper into the thicket, seeking to uncover the source of the mysterious sound that had caught his attention. He mentioned it resembled the sound of something striking a pillow, or those soft thuds that seemed to align with. There's a presence emitting gentle sounds, soft grunts and groans, inviting your imagination to conjure a vivid scene. That aligns perfectly with this description. Others had the same thought. He continued to search for the sound, convinced he was on the verge of discovering two mischievous characters engaged in their antics, concealed in the shadows. Bushes, yet what he discovered was entirely unexpected. Upon arriving at the location, his eyes beheld something remarkable in the depths of the darkness. He could only depict a figure kneeling over another, seemingly delivering blows to him. The fist struck the chest of the one lying face up on the ground, who remained silent. At that moment, Lace comes to the shocking realization that the man is not just throwing punches. He's wielding a knife in his hand. That as he was not hitting him, he was stabbing him. When my friend finally understood what he was conveying, he said, he must have emitted a sound akin to a stifled scream. And that's when the ominous figure we spotted in the parking lot shifted his gaze towards him. That was the cue for him to dash out of the place and return to the car once Lear wrapped up his story. In that chilling moment, we all exchanged glances filled with disbelief, but this time it wasn't merely a matter of skepticism. We found ourselves torn, caught between disbelief and the undeniable truth of his words. Deep down, we recognized he was speaking honestly this time, yet we continued to grapple with our doubts as we navigated through our confusion. To process what had just occurred, I glanced in my rearview mirror and noticed a pair of headlights drawing closer behind me. The bumper raced by in an instant, and at that precise moment, I drifted away from the conversation. In an instant, I gaze at the headlights, anticipating their swift passage, yet they remain still, and the next moment unfolds. What I remember is those headlights were incredibly close and intensely bright, lighting up the whole interior of my car. Capture the guy's attention, and while I'm in a state of panic, questioning what this other driver could possibly be thinking, I hear a yell. It's him, it's him, it's him, and in an instant, wham, the driver speeds up and collides with my car, nearly pushing me off the road. We all erupted in screams of terror, but I managed to keep my grip on the steering wheel, maintaining control of the car, though it was a close call. Another impact like that, and I might not be so lucky, and I might not be able to halt on the road. It felt as though I were ensnared in this dreadful dead end. I pressed the accelerator, and I attempted to flee in the car, but the driver collided with my rear bumper once more, intensifying my unease. In that instant, I eased off the accelerator, striving to reclaim control of the vehicle. I even considered coming to a halt and facing off against this individual, considering we were a group of 4 and he stood alone. Yet, then, just as I dreaded, the car struck us for the 3rd time, and this time, he focused all his strength on one side of my bumper, leading me to completely lose control of the car. And despite my best efforts to maintain our course, we ultimately collided forcefully with a metal barrier at the roadside. As the vehicle descended a gentle incline on the opposite side of the road, it tumbled over several times along the way. I recall squeezing my eyes shut, my hands firmly clutching the steering wheel and pondering, oh God, this is how I would meet my end as I braced for the inevitable impact. Yet, when the vehicle finally arrived, it came to a halt, and the impact ceased. In that moment, I understood that I was still alive and aware, aching all over, but grateful to be here. For that, I felt even more so when I heard the complaints and curses of each of my friends, which made it clear to me that they were alive as well, thank God. Somehow, we were fortunate enough to touch down with the wheels on the ground, and The initial action I took was to switch off the car engine, as smoke was billowing from beneath the hood, and in that moment, I became aware of the distinct scent of gasoline, and it hit me that we were in deep trouble. In that instant, we all began to react. Desperate to break free, we found ourselves confined, the exits sealed tight and crushed by the weight of the rollover, leaving us ensnared. But then, one of my friends in the back began to kick the rear glass, which, surprisingly, remained intact. That's how we found our way to safety. Thankfully, the car didn't ignite, but it was still quite a harrowing experience. Another fortunate fact is that the driver of the car that hit us was gone. I guess he assumed we were not there. We were going to make it through, but now we faced another challenge. It was 1991, and cell phones weren't part of our daily lives like they are now, which meant that if we needed to reach the police, we had to discover a phone on the road that might serve as a lifeline in emergencies or during our wait. We needed another driver to pass by so we could send him for help. Only Dylan and I were in a position to do so. We could walk anywhere to seek assistance, but that would mean leaving Lur and Iger alone by the roadside, a thought we dreaded. Of the man who drove us off the road, eager to return and complete his task, only to discover our friends present, utterly powerless. We understood that if the man was genuinely intent on eliminating the witnesses, he wouldn't think twice about it. It only took a moment to cause pain for them both or to linger and anticipate our return. Thankfully, that scenario never unfolded because, simply put, as we pondered our decision to leave or stay, a car appeared around the bend, and we began signaling for assistance from the driver. Paused, and by a stroke of fortune, this woman happened to possess one of those vintage cell phones that resembled a brick and featured an antenna at the end, enabling her to reach out to the police on our behalf. And we nearly pleaded with her. We decided to wait until they arrived, and even though the van that had forced us off the road never came back, fear gripped us that he would return to complete the task he had begun. Ultimately, we all spent the remainder of the night in a hospital with 2 police officers nearby, attentive to everything we had to say. By the end of the night, we all had a collection of sprains and bumps and various other injuries, yet nothing that a few days of rest couldn't mend. We truly were quite lucky to receive. Emerging from that dreadful incident with merely superficial injuries, I managed to call my mom that night, and Dad was at the hospital. And while they were shocked by the news of our crash, they felt as relieved as we did to discover that we had emerged from it all largely unscathed, though regrettably, all our months of effort had felt nearly futile, a total squandering of time. Yet somehow, considering the seriousness of in that situation, I didn't feel like I had truly lost anything. I mean, I still had my health, and all my friends were there. All right, even though I lost my cherished car, I've been struggling to sleep. They didn't locate the body, but there was sufficient blood to support Lister's account of what he witnessed. A person was stabbed, and regarding the van that rammed us, it was located about a week later. Eventually deserted, a forest on the opposite side of Manchester bore blood stains within, and the registration corresponded with one that had been in the same parking lot. Ultimately, we had just managed to escape the fate of being silenced forever as a witness to there was a murder. But beyond that, we remained largely in the dark for quite a while, and I have no clue whether they ever apprehended the individual who pursued us, but nearly a year later, we discovered that the individual involved that night was a co-owner of a construction firm, and he had recently taken his partner was taken to court for a type of fraud, and soon after, the body was discovered, leading to the sudden disappearance of this deceitful partner. Instantly and entirely became the main suspect in the murder of his partner, the very guy who pursued us. In his truck, Lister had observed the precise instant he was concluding the act against the partner he had betrayed. But the unexpected twist in the case was that L had misjudged the killer's actions, believing he had stabbed his partner in the chest, only to discover later that this was not the truth. It became clear that the true cause of death was strangulation, which adds an even more unsettling layer to the situation, considering the individual had carried a knife with him to complicate the police's efforts in identifying them. He aimed for his partner's face, not the chest. But the darkness enveloped everything for Lur to perceive distinctly that, in truth, the victim was being attacked in the face. This tale unfolds from a time long past, over 3 decades ago, involving my 3 old friends. My partner and I are now married, have children, and reside in a different place, so we don't. We don't have the chance to meet as often as we desire. But occasionally we gather in our old village, it is now significantly more populated and boasts several pubs that we seize the chance to visit during those times. Tempers often flare during these gatherings, yet eventually the dialogue inevitably shifts towards the incident and how fortunate we were to return home safely after that, especially considering there was one individual who never made it back. A few years back, I embarked on a road trip to explore and hike through several major parks across the country. Being an avid hiking enthusiast, I was thrilled to take on this adventure. I have visited numerous fascinating locations, and this specific journey held great significance for me as it introduced me to many new and there are remarkable destinations. Yet I can't shake off a frightening experience I encountered on the journey to my first. It was my second night on the road, and I was driving, reflecting on the destination that almost eluded me, thanks to a series of unforeseen events. On the highway, it was quite late. In fact, I was the only car on the road for a considerable stretch until I suddenly noticed a vehicle approached from behind while I occupied the right lane. It shifted into the left lane to overtake me, but as it matched my speed, rather than overtaking me, it drew up beside me, and I suddenly became aware. I noticed something in my peripheral vision and caught a glimpse of the driver out of the corner of my eye. He was a bald man. Wearing sunglasses was something that immediately captured my attention, especially since it was nighttime, and those glasses appeared quite intriguing. In the dim light, the man had lowered the front passenger side window and was gesturing at me. When I turned to glance his way, he began, as he gestured with his arms. I rolled down the window and noticed he was speaking as well. He seemed to be signaling that there was an issue with my car. He was shouting, but I couldn't catch a word. I couldn't catch the words he was saying. We were moving too quickly, and it was clear this guy didn't know me, as there were many of us around, miles distant from my hometown, and his features were completely unrecognizable as I pondered what he might be. He kept yelling at me, gesturing wildly with his hands. I thought something must be happening. Something seems off with my car. I'm not sure, but perhaps I have a flat tire that I just haven't noticed yet. Even though everything appeared to be in order, I glanced at my check engine light, and it was off. I'm not an automotive specialist, but I truly didn't sense anything unusual. However, I remained convinced that a man observed something beyond my perception, yet I remained oblivious to the warning he attempted to convey. I made the choice to take the upcoming exit on the right, so I eased off the accelerator. As I took the exit, the man remained by my side, following closely behind. As I drove, I noticed a gas station about a mile ahead and made the decision to stop there. I pulled into the gas station. The only thing in that area caught my attention, and upon closer inspection, I realized I was alone. I parked my car and a man parked beside me, and as we both exited our vehicles, he approached me and said that there was an issue with my car, so I promptly inquired about it. He explained the situation to me, saw it releasing black smoke from the exhaust, which really unsettled me, so I inquired about its significance, and he explained it to me, indicated that there was a serious issue with the engine, then instructed me to enter his vehicle, assuring me he would drive me to the closest. He was a mechanic, and he would fix it. When he mentioned this, it stirred a sense of unease within me. I couldn't shake off that bad feeling. I definitely wasn't keen on going anywhere with this guy, so I asked him to hold on and attempted to get him to elaborate further on. He described the issue as significant engine damage that required immediate attention and kept urging me to accompany him to fetch the mechanic, but it felt so strange. It was nearly midnight, after all. The mechanic working at that hour raised my suspicions, Something about it just didn't feel right, even though the guy remained composed throughout. There was an unsettling quality to his aggressive behavior. Something felt off. I couldn't help but wonder why he was so eager for me to get into his car. That moment when I shifted to the rear of my car to inspect the exhaust pipe, and it struck me that it was flawless, chrome-plated. If my car were emitting black smoke, that should definitely be evident in the exhaust. Stained black, I leant down and slipped my fingers in, searching for remnants of There was smoke, yet nothing was there. I stood up, ready to inform the guy that there was no smoke, but as I turned, under his guidance, I experienced a sudden impact on the left side of my face, which left me utterly bewildered, and as I attempt to regain my composure, I experienced the second impact that nearly sends me reeling. The floor, and despite my dazed state, I could sense the impending third blow, so I successfully avoided it, and in that instant, I understood that the guy was striking me with a bottle. Alcohol, however, had miraculously remained intact despite the impact, but looking, with my hands thoroughly soaked and marked in crimson, I came to the realization that my face had, at that moment. The instant he lunges at me once more, aiming to strike me again with the bottle, yet I successfully, a lunge for his arm, causing the bottle to slip from his grasp and shatter on the pavement. In that moment, my attention wavered in a man seized my arm, twisting it behind my back, while his other arm encircled my neck, starting to choke me. I found myself perplexed by this man's actions and the reasons behind them. All I was certain of was that I needed to take action. I had to act quickly to escape his hold, or I knew I wouldn't last much longer. In that moment, I delivered a powerful blow, stomp on his foot, causing him to loosen his grip slightly. And then I seized the moment to deliver a couple of strikes to the face, one of which I'm certain fractured his nose as I could distinctly sense his septum crumple beneath mine. With a swift motion, I struck him hard in the groin, causing him to collapse to his knees. The floor, then on his side, curling in on himself from the pain as he hurled insults at me. I swiftly took. The benefit of that slight edge allowed me to hop into my car, pressing the gas pedal to the floor as I got back on the road. At full speed, I swiftly dialed 911 and headed towards the closest, the hospital that lay several miles ahead, glancing back in my rearview mirror every few moments to ensure he wasn't trailing me, but thankfully, I never caught sight of his car's headlights again after driving for quite a while. As I finally reached the hospital, it was at that moment that I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the emergency glass door. I was taken aback. My face was covered in blood, and my clothes were no better off, but fortunately, the injury was merely superficial, requiring just a few stitches and some painkillers. That very night, I went to the police station and reported the attack, providing a detailed account of what transpired, and provided a description of the man. However, I never discovered whether he was apprehended or what the motive was, what his assault was, or what he planned for me that evening. The reality is that despite the unfortunate and frightening circumstances, I refused to allow a sneaky madman on the road to spoil the trip I had meticulously planned. After many months, I persevered and ultimately succeeded in completing my route as intended, though it came with a slight discomfort from stitches. And my name is Haim, and I am about to share one of the most chilling experiences I have ever encountered. For nearly 2 decades, I have navigated the streets as a cab driver. It was still early in the day, and I had already taken a couple to the bus station, and now I was headed to the airport for another service. Fortunately, things were looking up. After 4 days, the fare was situated in an affluent neighborhood, something noteworthy. I truly value the fact that those individuals frequently left generous tips when they received a swift journey back to their starting point. It took me 7 minutes to arrive, a real record. I thought I'd probably earned a decent tip for this service, but when I arrived, no tip was given. One was outside waiting, so I let out a quick whistle to my neighbor, and a moment later, a stunning blonde appeared, her head out the upstairs window. Just a minute, she told me, but understanding the nature of women, timing was everything, and I sensed there was more to uncover. I shifted the transmission into park and leant back quietly in my seat that summer of. In 1981, the heat was unbearable. Even with the air conditioning running, I found myself soaked in sweat. Just moments later, a blonde emerged and climbed into the cab, but she was not alone. A scruffy, long-haired man accompanied her, emerged alongside her, and as they approached the car, it dawned on me that they were. "Where's your luggage, everyone? Let's head to the airport," I told the girl, and then they exchanged a brief glance before responding. "It's already there." I shrugged and turned away. It wasn't my responsibility to decipher the thoughts of those struggling with addiction. I started the cab, and for the majority of the ride, not much happened. It was mentioned that they would sometimes share whispers, though nothing reached a volume that I could consistently hear. Every now and then, I caught snippets of their conversation. I would steal glances at the blonde through the rearview mirror. She caught me looking a few times and smiled each time. Yet every time she revealed her now decayed teeth, a small pang of sadness washed over me. She had clearly been There was a time when her beauty shone brightly. A glimpse of the woman she once was before the substance altered her existence. Even from a distance, traces of that former self lingered. But as time went on, the shadows grew deeper. As she approached, the deep wrinkles and open sores she displayed revealed her vices quite clearly. These were my thoughts until they were interrupted by the escort who said to me, "Hey man, there was a change of... we need you to take us somewhere else." As I was casually mentioning this, the guy pointed. With a nod of his head, he indicated that we should proceed over the viaduct to puncture these. Words really pissed me off, and of course I wasn't going to change course least of all to get high. Besides, I knew the area. It was a perilous situation, and I need you to understand, kid, that I truly regret it. But once we established the destination cannot simply be altered. It's a matter of safety regulations. If you wish, you can choose an alternative at the airport. Take a cab, and you can go wherever you desire. This wasn't entirely accurate, as I had the option to alter the route, as long as I reached out to notify dispatch. The reality was that I had no intention of heading anywhere near that location, and most likely, no other driver would I have glanced at in the rearview mirror as I conveyed this to him then. I observed the blonde murmuring something to him, and I could see a smile spreading across her face as she spoke. An air of confidence began to radiate from both of us, leaving me perplexed. I couldn't quite determine if they comprehended my words, or perhaps the substances they had consumed had ultimately scrambled there. So, there I was, and the guy turns to me and says, "Hey man, I don't think you got it. You need to take us to the place I mentioned." It has. This was expressed in such an arrogant manner that it genuinely made me chuckle. Yet, as I gazed into the mirror, the source of his arrogance became clear. He possessed a .38 caliber. With the revolver gripped tightly in his hands, he aimed it directly at me. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. These scoundrels likely never had any intention of letting me walk away. They planned to head to the airport, fully aware that mentioning anything about passing through that area would lead to complications. Had sent me, but that no longer held any significance. Now, I was compelled to follow their instructions, and I could only hope they... "Please, just put the gun down. I understand your point, and I can help you. Let's work together on this. What do you want?" They both chuckled when I said that, and the guy lowered the gun to his lap. "I'm pleased that we have reached a mutual understanding." And he gestured once more towards the viaduct. As I exited, it became clear to me that the viaduct was simply a large structure designed to transport vehicles over the railway lines. Below, it had consistently served as the lifeline linking the most secure and fruitful area of the town with the underbelly of crime. Across the tracks to the other side of Ridden Hollow, a place we had always avoided. It wasn't until that day that I finally ventured there. As I stepped into that dreadful place, a wave of unease surged within me, stirring a knot in my stomach. To begin with, I found myself uncertain about what lay ahead. The area unfolded before me as I stepped into the viaduct, a place I had never visited before. As I arrived at the spot they had indicated, I felt a sense of discovery. I was likely purchasing their vices, and it made me feel incredibly anxious. I struggled to find the right words to convey this feeling, except to say, it was a vivid portrayal of decadence. I observed numerous addicts meandering like zombies, individuals existing in truly distressing circumstances, with children visibly suffering from malnutrition, in a scene that left me horrified and heartbroken. At the same time, a woman struggling with addiction was quite conspicuous as she sat at the entrance of a crumbling shack with a frail baby clinging to her chest. Evokes a profoundly sorrowful scene. It was difficult to shake off the memory of asking my captors about my location, only to find them highly entertained by my inquiry. As my anxiety mounted, the guy informed me that I still had a few more laps ahead. We continued driving. Deeper into the suburb, we halted at a residence where a pair of shirtless, tattooed men stood, each wielding a firearm. As he approached my car with something tucked away, I felt a surge of nausea rise in my throat. I swear I had never felt such anxiety in my life. They handed him what appeared to be multiple bags filled with various substances. You know, the nonsense they indulge in. But what truly unsettled me about this situation is that they began to converse. Regarding sales and routes, they were addressing one another by their names, a rare occurrence that seldom takes place with dealers when there is another presence, unless, of course, that presence is not going to survive to reveal their actions at that. My anxiety was escalating. All I could focus on was the terrifying thought that I might perish in that very place. A location I might never escape. Discovered, and my wife would remain oblivious to my fate. At one moment, one of the dealers began to circle my vehicle and informs the other that it's an excellent machine and that it's precisely what they require to accomplish the task tonight. I assure you, I had never experienced such a wave of panic in my life. It felt like a clear sign that they would seize my car and bring my story to an end. After that, both dealers entered my car, and we embarked on a journey through the deepest and most decadent nooks and crannies, unimaginable as they exchanged their goods. This continued for approximately 2 or 3 hours, and then one of the men said to the one who had taken me, "It's time." After that, the 2 men exited. I entered the car and then stepped into a house where the blonde and the scruffy man led me to a hidden spot, nearly at the very edge of. In the alley, silence enveloped the scene, broken only by the distant laughter of children at play. The sound of a soccer ball echoed in the distance, and I recall pondering that this is the... Ultimately, their plans for me led my thoughts to my family as I awaited my wife should be informed. I was uncertain whether I would reclaim my body or remain in this cab, decaying for an unknown duration. At long last, the person who had taken me spoke. "Remove your watch and wallet. Take the ring and slip it into your wallet as you head back to Anna, making sure not to look back," just as the blonde instructed. Name she was certainly facing her end. I tried my hardest to conceal my trembling as I did when I provided them what they requested it, but naturally, I sensed the tremor. She released a soft giggle as she accepted the items they provided. They had everything they required, but then he demanded the keys to the cab. And that was undoubtedly the most frightening moment. It seemed they were about to take my life and my cab, leaving my wife with no chance to lay me to rest after all. I tried my hardest to conceal the tears as I sensed the couple beginning to stir in the back. A wave of fear washed over me at the thought of looking in their direction. In the reflection, I wished to remain oblivious. I inhaled deeply, shutting my eyes, bracing myself for the moment of grace. In that instant, a vivid picture of my wife flashed before me, adorned in the lovely little red dress I had chosen for her. For our anniversary, she had her hair up and was sitting on our couch. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen her in. Since our first date, I found myself preparing to bid farewell to my life, all while caught in that perfect image. An overwhelming sense of surrender enveloped me as the sound of a car door opening echoed from behind, yet I chose to disregard it. This moment was simply too exquisite. The sight was haunting, yet the sounds of hurried footsteps soon shattered my reverie, pulling me back from the depths of my imagination. Fear gripped me, leaving me too terrified to turn around. Initially, I found myself in a state of gradual awakening, my eyes fluttering open as I directed my gaze towards the most distant point within my sight. And in that moment, I began to discern that the door on the rear passenger side was ajar, prompting me to gather every ounce of courage to glance in my rearview mirror and observe. I came to the realization that I was alone, and as I turned around, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over me. Consumed my existence, enveloped my being. Their intent was not to end me, but rather they possessed what? They needed it, and then they were gone. In that moment, nothing else mattered. I was simply content to exist. In those fleeting moments, I found myself with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face as I expressed my gratitude to God for this experience. An opportunity for renewal, embracing the joy of existence until the gravity of reality settled in and I understood. I was still present, whether alive or not. But I couldn't bear to remain in this neighborhood for even another moment, especially now. As the shadows began to creep in, I swiftly engaged my car's gears, hoping fervently that the fuel I had would suffice. With just enough fuel to reach the nearest station, I shifted the car into gear and attempted to maneuver my way out. I was determined to escape that dreadful situation as quickly as I could, and I truly exerted every ounce of effort to discover a way out. In a maze of winding streets that turned into my own personal torment, the moment I finally found my way out, I felt as though a heavy weight had been removed from my shoulders, and all that I had gone through that afternoon appeared to be the result. It was a nightmare, the worst I have ever experienced. That night, I found myself going to the police. I arrived at the station and recounted the events, but it was only after I returned home that I embraced my wife with the most heartfelt and extended hug. In that instant, it was as though my very essence was reset, and time itself came to a standstill. I was devoid of sensation. Eventually, I felt a sense of happiness and relief when my captors were apprehended and incarcerated, but regarding the others, malefactors, I heard nothing. They were likely still at large. Yet I never encountered them again in my life, much less returned to that dreadful. Hello, my name is Angelo. I've been driving a cab for a decade now. A few months back, I encountered the most bizarre and unsettling experience I've ever faced in my years behind the wheel. There was this middle-aged, well-dressed, good-looking man at a bus terminal. But when he spoke, he said the oddest notions I've encountered, yet he sowed a seed of uncertainty that continues to haunt my thoughts even now. And what began as an engaging dialogue concluded with a chill coursing through me from head to toe. And today, I will recount in detail everything I recall about this encounter. On Saturday nights, I operate in what I refer to as the cemetery, the locations where individuals typically visit to lay their sorrows to rest, those bars. The vibrant world of discos, casinos, and nightclubs of every variety often sees my rates elevated during the nighttime hours. However, today was an exception to that norm. That evening, I had just taken two very inebriated girls back to their homes, one of whom was a striking redhead. Informs me that she lacked sufficient change for a tip, but to compensate, she thought it would be a good idea to demonstrate. I noticed her figure, which I didn't mind, though I never brought it up. To be truthful, I would have liked to. I prefer my suggestion, though I have to acknowledge they were pleasant. Regardless, the point is, it was approximately 3 a.m. As I walked by the bus terminal, I found myself in my familiar work zone, as it is a regular part of my routine. Situated right in the heart of the city, with nearly all the clubs, casinos, and nightlife options surrounding it. The catch is, that evening, as I was making my way home after dropping off a pair of girls, I spotted a tall, elegantly dressed man gesturing with his hand. He looked at me and gestured for me to halt. As someone familiar with the streets, I recognized that man. In a sharp suit late at night is just as compelling a cue so I didn't hesitate to pause and respond to his beckoning once he entered the. He stepped out of the car and closed the door behind him, removing the stylish hat perched on his head. The man was dressed like a movie star, exuding an air of charisma as he made his exit. When I saw him up close, I realized his style seemed rather outdated. In fact, from afar, he appeared quite different, appeared older, yet with a more careful glance, I understood he could not have been beyond 30 or 35 years. Initially, I was apprehensive, thinking I had encountered a time traveler, for he resembled a film star straight out of the 1950s. Yet here, he was in the present. As is my habit, I inquired about his destination. His response caught me off guard. He simply said, "I don't. I genuinely understand that I'm here for work, and I'm seeking someone to guide me through the area." I found this response quite strange. It brought a smile to my face. It felt a bit late for a sightseeing adventure, but in true form, I thought, why not seize the moment? "If you compensate me, sir, I will take you wherever you desire." And that is the origin of it all. In roughly 2 hours, I guided him through the city, showcasing all the essential sights and highlights. A newcomer should be aware of this city. I recall giving him a tour of the university and the Capitol building, parks, the key dining establishments and accommodations, along with various nightlife venues in. He enjoyed having fun, but at one point during our little tour, I recall him mentioning that he was in town on. I inquired about the nature of his business, if he was willing to share, and his response was quite peculiar. It truly made me chuckle. The guy was undoubtedly a natural at making people laugh with his response. "Well, I'm what some might refer to as a professional in my field. The truth is, I've been enjoying the company of this passenger immensely." I chose to go along with it, finding it rather amusing, so I replied, "Okay, sir. I'm curious to know how the business operates. Do they have a phone number for contact? It's like you could locate it in the directory or something. Kind of a humorous inquiry for a lighthearted scenario, you know?" He mentioned that a woman reached out to him through another client, clearly indicating my involvement. "The number isn't publicly accessible, but I can be reached via intermediaries." All right, that's a solid response. Now, regarding business B, I inquired about it, and the answer is straightforward. She provides me with names, photos, and any relevant information I request that could assist me in performing well. And once we come to a decision about the job, we can discuss the payment. If we reach an agreement on the amount, I will commit fully to the work. Total secrecy following this. I inquired about how he ensured he received payment after causing harm to someone. It seems he discovered the selection of words was quite amusing, and I found myself laughing a lot at his response. It may not be prudent to disclose that aspect to him, as we must maintain certain confidences. So, how does one approach this? The client is aware that you have finished the task. I felt a sense of regret as I posed the question, even before I had fully articulated it. Yet still, although it was a rather foolish question, he still managed to provide me with an answer, laced with a touch of sarcasm in his tone. "Well, my dear gentlemen, we find ourselves in an era characterized by a relentless 24-hour news cycle across various media and social networks. Don't you think that if your father passed away unexpectedly, someone will reach out to your mother first, but if you don't learn about it yourself, someone else will inform you? I'll let you know once I receive my payment. My connection with the client will conclude then. She's finally done." After that, her independence sparked a new line of thought in me. The final part of his response led me to ponder another question. What if she were to be arrested or implicated in the act? What would you do? He paused for a moment, contemplating, responding. I envisioned he was weighing the extent of what to share with a stranger in his cab. Yet he pressed on. At some stage, safeguards are established to ensure my protection first. If I executed my responsibilities correctly, the client should face no issues. Details about myself to provide to the authorities, and in the event that I make a significant mistake, I have several options available. Exit strategies are crucial. I won't allow the authorities to capture me. Ultimately, none of us truly live for all eternity. I must admit that there were several moments within our small narrative chat where I had to keep in mind that this was merely a game, yet he made it enjoyable, and honestly, his The creativity and vision truly astonished me. We had been engaged in this game for. It wasn't until hours later that I thought to inquire about how he began in this field, and once again, his response left me quite. I was taken aback when I enlisted in the military immediately after high school and noticed that my efforts garnered the interest of my superiors. I was directed to a few gentlemen in the government, and I dedicated a decade of my career to working alongside them before moving on. I recall the moment I decided to embark on my own business venture, confidently expressing to him that I excelled in this area. He should definitely think about becoming a storyteller if that's not already his profession. I mentioned to him that I was truly impressed. This experience was the most enjoyable I've ever had while driving cab. I was accustomed to handling intoxicated individuals and self-important executives made for a rather remarkable and nearly purifying exchange. I appreciate it, young man, expressed to me, and then went on, I value all that you've revealed to me this evening. By the way, it was at that moment that He understood that the night was drawing to a close, with the sun poised to rise any moment. I could feel my energy waning, yet I seized the chance to pose a final question, one that I should have brought up much sooner, as you had mentioned earlier this evening. Being in town for business, did that imply you were here to eliminate someone? At that moment, a smile spread across his face as he contemplated his response, and then he replied, well, indeed I was, but I received a last-minute message to cancel the operation, and I can. She could retain the half she had already given me, and I was fine with that. This is just how business operates. It occurs from time to time, after all. Isn't it a woman's right to change her mind? I hope she and her husband find a way to resolve things. As I wrapped up my service with this client, the first rays of sunlight began to grace the horizon, and he gestured towards something. At the destination where he would be staying, a few hotels lined the end of the parking lot, and I presumed that was his chosen place. Upon my arrival, he handed me $1,000, and before I could protest, he instructed me to. I'll just keep the change. This amount was more than double what I owed, but I was too exhausted to care. I appreciate it, but I must insist you keep the change. You deserve it. I truly enjoyed tonight. Thank you, sir. I thoroughly enjoy my time as well, and I'm especially grateful for the remarkable story you shared with me about him getting out of the car. After these exchanged thoughts, he paused and added one final remark that left me utterly frozen. I appreciate you showing me around tonight. Angelo, please take good care of Maya and try to stay out of trouble while you're at it. With a few gentle pats on the shoulder, I exited the parking lot and made my way home, filled with hope. It was supposed to be a simple morning with breakfast prepared, but then his words struck me with the force of a hammer. How did that happen? The guy knows my name, not to mention my wife's. My license was nowhere in sight, so I had to recreate the situation. The dialogue in my mind lingered through the night, and at no moment did I reveal anything that could have jeopardized the game. I never inquired about his name, and there was no need for him to know mine, much less my wife's. How did he even know I was married? Well, I hadn't slipped a ring onto my finger in years. I lost it in a sewer and never managed to retrieve it. It seems I also couldn't have anticipated that the issue stemmed from Maya and me rekindling our relationship just last week, because after being apart for several months and contemplating divorce for 2 years prior, I drove as I stood in the driveway, a troubling thought crossed my mind. Was there any possibility that this guy, the man, wasn't merely fabricating a tale? Everything he shared with me in the car was indeed true. What if this individual was? The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on me. The mere knowledge of my name and my wife's name by him could signify only one thing. Even if it were true, I found myself unprepared for what lay ahead. As Maya and I sat down for breakfast that morning, I found it impossible to ignore. But I couldn't shake the feeling of doubt as I watched her. The thought that my wife might have wished for my demise filled me with terror. Even if she had altered her decision, there was no way I could come to terms with it. Could she truly be capable of something like that? I considered asking for a moment, yet she would never acknowledge it. And if she... I truly wasn't ready for that response. I simply remained quiet as she spoke. She graciously presented me with a dessert, and for a brief moment, I paused before tasting it. However, her gentle encouragement and warmth made it impossible to resist. I found it difficult to decline, and since that day, I've been attempting to move past the issue for the sake of my mental well-being, yet the seed of uncertainty that he sowed in my mind that night remains vibrant even now. Perhaps one day I will. I gather the strength to discuss it with my wife. Yet for the moment, I choose to keep these thoughts to myself. I hope your day is filled with health and joy. I invite you to subscribe to my channel to hear true horror stories. Hello, and see you again.